Hi, my name is Oscar Viela, SPTA at IoT Modesto, and today we're going to be going over cultural competence. And it's going to be basically like a self assessment with an interview, and yeah, so let's get to it. So, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to go over the cultural competence. We're going to go with introduction, which is right now. We're going to do self assessment, and the self assessment is going to pertain the 6 levels of the continuum of cultural competence scale. APTA core values that I believe I carry for myself and that will be bringing into the field. And then the interview that I conducted with a friend of mine. And we're going to be going over the 12 domains in Purnell's model of cultural competence. And then the summary. And yeah, so let's get to it. So yeah, so we're gonna go over the 6 levels of continuum of cultural competence scale, right? And it's gonna pertain these lovely 6 statements, which is like cultural destructiveness, cultural indifferences, cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, and cultural proficiency. So next slide, right? Cultural destructiveness is the first one. And I wanted to highlight the environment that I grew up in, the observations, educational backgrounds, and my own mindfulness. Um, like I mentioned earlier, I grew up going to a public school that was low budget for, a lack of a better word. Um, I was always an observant kid, so I would see a lot of kids from different cultures, races, and they would be treated in a different manner compared to other students. Um, and this was with other classmates, even some staff members as well. Um, and then in the school that I was going into, they were obviously doing a lot of history. Um, so I read a lot regarding oppression in school from the slavery era to the segregated era in the United States. Um, I know as a country, we've come very far from the past, but there's obviously more that we can do. When it comes to myself, I am a mindful individual and I always take into consideration how other people feel. I try to always be kind to others and treat them with respect. Um, as a human being, I know that we all go through our own battles and some that are spoken, but mainly, the ones that we don't talk about, right? And with that being said, I try to always keep this in mind when someone is having, a moment, and by moment I mean like being rude, right? Um, because in reality, when they're being that way, it's technically a result of them feeling not feeling heard or acknowledged. Um, and yeah, and I basically carry this method into work, right? Because I deal with chronic pain patients, and sometimes they're not having the best days. At the end of the day, they just want to feel heard and acknowledged, and like someone actually, cares. Because a lot of the cases that I work with is workers' comp cases, and a lot of people that are going through that are treated like as a number basically, and you know, just being human, right? Um, and yeah, so with that being said, I feel like I strongly agree with this, the cultural destructiveness. I said yes, for all those reasons, right? Next slide. So next slide is going to be cultural incapacity. And again, I wanted to point out cultural background, my personal experience, self-expression overall, and then again, overall being overall human beings, right? That's what we are at the end of the day. Um, from the question that I asked, as I understood it, it describes how the church setting can discriminate or even oppress other members due to their differences. If I could, like I said, if I understood it correctly, I could see how cultural values and beliefs can place others in an inferior position. Growing up, I went to Catholic church, so I grew up very Catholic, um, with very strict beliefs, right? My parents were very strict on implementing those beliefs. And I would go to church every Sunday without missing a beat, basically. I would be there. Uh, every Sunday, no matter what. And I would attend Bible studies because of this, and then also a youth group that they had from church every Wednesday. So I would do that as well. But with all this being said, right, due to this experience, I can see how our church would talk down on other religions and state how they were quote unquote wrong. However, they have their own right to express their beliefs just as much as we do, right? Um, I don't see an issue with this at all. At the end of the day, all that matters is that you're a good human being and you do good to others, right? Yes, you may cross some differences, but it doesn't matter. We're all literally bones, flesh, blood. We're all born on this earth and we all go away at some point. So, yeah. Um, yeah, that's all I got to say about this slide. Next one, we're talk about cultural blindness, right? And again, I like to highlight some of the personal experience I had, some mindfulness that I carry, and some observations that I've made. Right, cultural blindness. I would have to say that I can firmly see this taking place on several occasions, from school to work to church. There is some form of cultural blindness. Yes, it's true that we are all human beings, but that does not take away from the fact that every race or religion has their own struggles that they come across. Right, belittling their struggles is like saying that their battles do not suffice in the real world. Right. Um, I can't even tell you the amount of times I've heard "don't be sensitive" or "work harder," right? And I feel like that's just kind of like an insult to someone who is trying their absolute best. Growing up, we have read about how non-dominant groups were misrepresented to make it less harmful, right? So I'm Hispanic, right? I come from a Hispanic background, um, right? With that being said, in school we talked about a little bit about the farmers era, right, when all the all the migrant workers were being mistreated, and talked about famine. They had to endure dehydration, and they would work like slaves basically, and it was legal, right? Basically, they were taking advantage, and I think that's a key thing to see as cultural blindness. Cultural pre-competence is next. Again, highlighting the environment that I grew up, personal experience, and some logic and mindfulness. All right, when it comes to cultural pre-competence, I would have to say that I do lack knowledge and experience and understanding of other different cultures, right? I'm not an expert, right? I still have a lot to live and I have a lot to experience. Even though I did grow up in a very diverse school, and I got along with a lot of different individuals from different races, different religions, right? Again, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. That would literally be a lie, right? Um, every day there's something that we can learn from another culture, right? Like I mentioned before, I went to public school that was low budget, with a lot of Section 8 housing nearby. So I cross paths with different people every single day. From my experience, I would say that mutual respect and effort for understanding goes a long way. When it comes to work-related incidents, I have seen others come across paths from different cultures that have resulted in an explosion of emotions, and that's just due to like disrespect and or like miscommunication, right? I had an incident where a deaf individual was not feeling heard or seen by his provider, and he got really upset, and the interpreter that he had with him didn't really know proper sign language, and I had to basically like diffuse that, and I had to talk to him a little bit more, and I heard him out. I let his emotions right out, and yeah. So thankfully, like my background with sign language, thanks to my older brother, came in handy, and I was able to kind of diffuse that. And yeah, uh, cultural competency is next, and I would have to say that I agree with those statements that were in that question. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very aware of my surroundings and hyper aware of the individuals, which translate over to all that I do. Right, I enjoy being surrounded by a variety of people, and I love to learn from everyone. I tend to have an open mind and I'm very patient. I'm aware of my own beliefs and biases, but I also know that how to but I also know how to put them aside, right? So I know there's a time and place for that too. Um, Growing up, I experienced nothing but diversity, which has helped me become the person that I am today. I would never say that I am an expert, but I know that I constantly learn from others, right? And I know there's so many cultures out there, and yeah, it would be very closed-minded of me to just say that, oh yeah, I know everything. When in reality, there's literally so much to learn from anyone and everyone. um, and yeah. Um, and lastly, on this continuum, we have cultural proficiency. Um, as I mentioned in the previous slides, learning is a lifelong process, right? Which is why I've also stated that I'm not an expert, right? There's always room to learn and grow and improve, right? Especially when it comes down to cultural experience. Um, California itself is one of the most diverse states in the United States, so you can literally come across any and every single culture out here, right? Um, the key thing is to maintain balance and putting an effort to learn and to understand another person. You can learn from literally reading, or you can literally just have a conversation with someone, a frank conversation at that. Talk to them, listen to them. You got to portray mutual respect and ask appropriate questions, obviously. Um, Arrogance is the poison for an egocentric individual, which is why we should all be willing to learn and carry with an open mind in work areas and in life in general, right? And then some of the core values that I firmly believe I'll be bringing into the PTA world will have to be integrity, compassion and caring, collaboration, excellence, and duty. Um, I think throughout this entire semester, I've been able to portray all of these characteristics. And I love that they're a part of the APTA, because at the end of the day, we're providing care, we're providing one-on-one sessions with our patients, right? We're always with them, and we're going to be seeing them the most, right? And that goes hand in hand with collaboration, right? Because we have to talk to the PT, right? To supervise the PT, we have to talk to the family, we have to talk to the patient, right? Especially the patient. We have to talk to with the patient's physicians, right? So it has to be a key, like I mentioned in the previous slide, it has to be a key component, right? Collaboration, integrity, duty, excellence, and integrity, right? It has to all kind of align, right? But moving on to the interview, right? I interviewed my friend here. Her name's Jeanette Gutierrez. I can never say your last name right. And she is Mexican, but she was born here. Her family is very intact with their Mexican culture. And I know I didn't say, but I'm Salvadorian, and a lot of people confuse me with being Mexican, and that's okay. I grew up with that my entire life, and that's fine, right? But yeah, so we're gonna go through the Purnell's model with her interview, and yeah, let's get to it. All right, so we're going to be going through the Purnell model, and the first two that it comes that crosses over is the overview and heritage and communication, right? So when I interviewed her, I made it very clear that we're just going to be talking about her and her religion and her ethnicity and all that stuff. And she was saying how it's full of history, right? The language they speak is mainly Spanish. However, she doesn't think she speaks it that well because of the American integration, right? Since she does live here, so she says that she speaks more of a Spanglish dialect, which I believe, because I do that too. She also states that machismo is a huge downside to her, like her ethnicity, right? And machismo, we'll get into it more later, but it's basically when men take a big part of the gender roles in the sense of controlling what a woman can do, and ultimately it basically leads them to being the head of the household, right? Catholicism is huge for Mexican Americans, and it fits that stereotype, right? That perfect image of who a Mexican should be, right? The communication, again, like I mentioned earlier, is Spanish. Spanish is their main language. Um, it varies from state to state, from what she's told me, and even specific words have different meanings. Like I know sometimes when she uses some words, it leaves me in the mood because I don't know what she's talking about. So I asked for clarification, which ultimately makes fun of me. Spanish is a combination of the original dialect, Castellano, as well as the indigenous dialect. And she claims that they speak a lot with their hands, and I believe it. Yeah, I feel like that's a common pattern that I've seen, or at least I've noticed. So a lot of gestures, indirect gestures, and yeah. So the next two is family roles, organizations, and workforce issues, right? So like I mentioned earlier, machismo plays a huge role in this context. Despite it constantly changing, it still has a huge impact, right? Due to it being more in America, it has shifted from being more open to changes, right? So it's more open here to change that machismo effect compared to Mexico itself. Considering the impacts of individuals' career paths, um, a man is supposed to focus on outside work, making big decisions, finances. Basically, his word is law, and that includes with what the wife does and do. Um, whereas the wife must control the inside of the house, like cleaning, not allowed to be in a room full of men, not supposed to be opinionated, and they're not even allowed to laugh too loud. Um, Women in the culture should always be as feminine as possible and should behave in such a manner. They should be considered the quote unquote perfect wife, right? Again, they have these roles kind of like instilled in them since they're little. And basically, machismo is the idea of men being more superior to women. Um, her her mom was raised in a Mexican traditional household, right? So she got to witness a lot of this. And then since she moved here into the States, it kind of shifted from what she's told me. But women are still expected to hold the household down, like they're supposed to control that. And men are expected to provide financially and to provide safety for the household. Um, Again, women are supposed to be taking care of the family, providing food and keeping the house clean. And men are expected to do all the outside stuff, right? Do the quote unquote manly chores, men work. And basically, men are supposed to take the lead and women are supposed to follow the men. When it comes to workforce issues, because she is in a supervisor role, she's find it kind of difficult sometimes because she does work with a lot of other Mexican American individuals. And since she is in a supervisor role, they kind of do like what she calls mansplaining. And I guess mansplaining, which is basically restating what a woman says for it to be validated by a man. So she has to experience this on a day-to-day basis. And then this is what she calls the machismo effect. Right. So next two is biocultural ecology and high-risk behaviors. Um, for the first one, biocultural ecology, right? Because her family was able to move to the United States. A lot of the traditions that were held in Mexico are shifting here, especially in, the economics nowadays, right? Women are supposed to have an outside job here, right? It's kind of like what they're expected to do on top of the day-to-day chores of the household, right? So it's kind of like adding onto it a little bit. Men, for the most part, here in the United States, share the household chores, but they still kind of try to stick with like the typical gender roles of like men doing the outside work, women doing the inside work. Ideally, they would want to do both, but yeah. And then due to them coming here, they see a lot of switching of religions. and they've seen a lot of divorces. In Mexico, it's not really common for that to happen. High risk behaviors. Men drink and smoke everywhere, according to her in Mexico. And it's a common theme in the Mexican culture, and women are not allowed to drink or smoke, which also kind of leads to excessive use of alcohol and cigarettes, right? Women are supposed to engage or not supposed to engage in sexual activity in marriage, women are supposed to engage in sexual activity in marriage at least twice a week to maintain the marriage, right? Risk-taking behavior is common due to the machismo effect, like little boys are taught this and leave little girls in vulnerable situations. Due to this, it leads to drinking, sexual activity, smoking, and other risky behaviors to prove themselves. And yeah. All right, next two are the nutrition and pregnancy. When it comes to nutrition, she's very reliant on tortillas and grains. You're not allowed to say no to food, especially if it's offered, and you're supposed to say that Mexican food is the best. If someone offers you food, it's more of a common courtesy. It's like welcoming an individual, and it can be a way of proving their womanhood by cooking. All right, if you do say no to food, it's also considered rude, especially if it comes from like an elderly person, right? Food can vary from state to state within Mexico, and she called me out on this. But meal prepping is not a thing, and it's actually looked down upon, which I didn't know. Most Mexican dishes are not healthy, which leads to a lot of health issues like hypertension or diabetes and obesity. Parents also force you to finish your entire plate. If you did not finish it, it would be kind of like punished or looked down as being wasteful. When it comes down to pregnancy, you're not supposed to be taking any type of birth control. You're supposed to bear as many children as you can due to religion. Boys are considered a bonus, right? So if you have boys, it's kind of like what you want because that allows you to pass down your last name, right? Gender reveals are a new addition to the culture and it's becoming more popular. You are only allowed to get pregnant by your husband, and if it comes from an outside individual, then it's considered a bad thing, right? Also, if they experience miscarriages, you're not supposed to talk about it. If anything, they're kept a secret. And then in vitro fertilization, IVF, is not approved by a lot of people out there, right? It is said that if God did not want you to have babies, your only other option is to adopt, right? Yeah. Alrighty, so next two are death rituals and spirituality. When it comes to death rituals, right? It's simple, right? Catholicism, right? Being Catholic plays a huge role. You're not supposed to be cremated. The only option is to be in a casket, and you must recite. It's in Spanish. It's called the novenario for 9 days straight, which is basically like the rosary. And you need to have a church service to get one step closer to heaven. And despite it being a sad event, you're supposed to be happy because the afterlife is the ultimate goal. They believe in heaven, purgatory, and hell. And I asked what purgatory was because I didn't know. And she states that purgatory is where everyone goes in the afterlife, and that is where Jesus or God decides where you go. So that's kind of where he decides your fate. You can also have your family pray for your salvation, and that changes. Spirituality, Catholicism, right? Being Catholic, go to church every Sunday, marry within your own religion. If you marry outside your religion, you sign a contract saying the kids will practice Catholicism, and God should be at the top of your daily life as well as your marriage. Prayer is required before bed and when you wake up. Catholicism has written prayers that you can recite as part of your prayer. We pray to God, or you can pray to a different saint to carry your request to God. When you have kids, the first thing you have to do is get them baptized. We believe that if your child is not baptized, they cannot go to heaven, and after they need to do their first communion, confirmation, and then marriage, or you can turn into a nun or a priest. So next two is healthcare practices and healthcare professionals, right? They tend to typically stick more towards the natural remedies due to it being passed down from generation to generation, right? They try to be as resourceful as they can. And yeah, they basically try to stay away from doctors as much as possible. They don't like doctors. I've learned this. She made it very clear because they're skeptical of doctors and the cost of healthcare, just affordability, and the lack of resources, right? So in Mexico, it can take a very long time for you to get to a hospital or even a clinic and get the help that you need, right? So they end up trying to just take care of it themselves. The only time they'll go to the doctor is if basically they're almost on their deathbed, and if it's like a huge diagnosis like cancer. Other than that, they try to mainly take care of themselves and keep it within the family. Next, I found this research article that was talking about machismo, and it was basically a study that talked about the health beliefs of Mexican American men, focusing on the impact of machismo on the perception of health and illness. And it argues that machismo drives men to prioritize their health to fulfill their roles as a provider and community member. Often this motivates them to go see the doctors. The article also highlights the changing dynamics of gender roles within Mexican American families, where women increasingly take on decision-making roles nowadays. For nurse practitioners, so NPs, understanding these cultural values is crucial for delivering effective cultural competent care. The authors call for more research into men's health belief across cultures and emphasize the importance of non-judgmental communications about health issues, including folk illnesses, and improve patient relationships and health outcomes. These are all my references. The end.